My mother made me less than my sister my whole life, but when she nearly killed my 5-year-old son by ignoring his deadly allergies, I cut all contact and now my entire family calls me cruel. I'm 28 years old. I'm a single mother, and I need to tell this story because what happened with my mother basically forced me to choose between my son's safety and maintaining a relationship with the woman who gave me life. And honestly, it still hurts to think about it. My son Mason is 5 years old now and he's okay. Thank God. But things could have ended very differently if I hadn't made the decisions I made. Even though those decisions cost me practically my entire extended family and turned me into the villain of a story no one wants to hear in full. I guess I should start from the beginning. When my dad died, I was like 8 years old. My sister Emily was 6, and my mother Gloria was devastated. I mean, completely broken. My dad was everything to her, and when he left, something in her changed permanently. Before that, I don't remember much. Honestly, just fragments of a normal life. You know, family dinners, trips to the park, those things you take for granted when you're a Macon kid. But after Dad died, my mother started showing a very obvious preference for Emily. And I'm not talking about small things. I'm talking about huge differences in how she treated us. Emily got new clothes every school season, while I wore what we found in thrift stores. Emily had ballet and piano classes while they told me there was no money for my activities. Emily could skip school if she felt a little sick while I had to go, even if I was throwing up. And the worst part is that everyone saw it. The neighbors, the teachers, even family. But no one said anything because my mother had just been widowed, and I guess everyone thought she was doing the best she could. I basically grew up raising myself, learning to cook at 10 years old because my mother was busy taking Emily to her activities, doing my homework alone at the kitchen table, while the two of them watched movies cuddled on the couch, celebrating my birthdays with a supermarket cake, while Emily had themed parties with decorations and everything. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate my sister. She was just a kid too, and it wasn't her fault that Mom treated her like a princess while treating me like an annoyance. But I did develop a lot of resentment. I'm not gonna lie to you. And when I turned 18, all I wanted was to get as far away from that house as possible. I went to college on a partial scholarship and working 2 different jobs to pay for the rest. Because obviously my mother said she didn't have money to help me, even though Emily later went to an expensive private university. But anyway, that's another story. During those college years, I had minimal contact with my family, obligatory calls on birthdays and Christmas, short visits in summer, where I slept on the couch because my old room was now Emily's art space. I met my ex-husband in my last year. We got married super fast. Mistake number 1. I know. And when I got pregnant, I thought I was finally going to have the family I never had. As a child, Mason was born with severe allergies to 10 different foods. We're talking peanuts, eggs, dairy, wheat, soy, fish, shellfish, tree nuts, sesame, and mustard. The first 2 years of his life were a nightmare of hospital visits, tests, EpiPens, and a constant fear that anything he touched or breathed could kill him. My ex-husband couldn't handle the stress, among other things he couldn't handle, like keeping his hands to himself when he got angry, and we divorced when Mason was 3 years old. I found myself alone, broke, with a medically fragile child, and no options. So I did the only thing I could do. I went back to my hometown. My mother acted like the last 10 years hadn't happened, like I hadn't left escaping her toxicity, and suddenly she was super interested in being a grandmother. Emily, who had never left home, she was 26 and still living with Mom, was excited to be an aunt, and for a moment, just for a moment, I thought maybe things could be different. Maybe my mother had changed. Maybe being a grandmother would bring out a different side of her. Maybe I was being too harsh with my childhood memories. We started visiting on Sundays. Mason would play with Emily while I tried to have normal conversations with my mother, and everything seemed not perfect, but manageable. The problem started when my mother began becoming controlling about how I raised Mason. First, it was small comments about his vegan diet, which we followed strictly because of his allergies, and because it was easier to avoid cross-contamination. Then criticism about my small apartment. Then unsolicited opinions about his preschool education, his clothes, even how I cut his hair. Every visit became more tense, and I started reducing the time we spent there, which of course deeply offended my mother. I asked Emily to talk to her, to explain that I needed space and respect as a mother, but Emily did what she always does, which is basically nothing, because she doesn't, like conflict. One day in March, or maybe it was April, I don't remember exactly, I had an emergency at work and needed someone to watch Mason for a few hours. My regular babysitter was sick, and my mother practically begged me to let her watch him, promising she would follow all my instructions to the letter. I left her a detailed list of what he could eat, his emergency medications, hospital numbers, everything. When I returned 3 hours later, I found Mason on the living room floor, swollen like a balloon, barely breathing, and my mother hysterical screaming that she didn't know what had happened. Turns out she had given him cookies that looked healthy, from the health food store, without reading the ingredients that clearly listed egg, milk, and nuts. The ambulance ride was the longest of my life, holding my son's hand while the paramedics injected him with epinephrine and gave him oxygen, my mother following us in her car crying and saying it was an accident, that she didn't. You know, that the cookies said, organic, and she thought that meant they were safe. Mason was in the hospital for 2 days, and during those 48 hours, something in me broke permanently. It wasn't just the negligence. It was the fact that she hadn't even tried to read the list. I left her, hadn't even considered that my son's life depended on following simple instructions. After the hospital incident, I severely limited my mother's contact with Mason. Only supervised visits, never alone with him, never at her house. Of course, this caused huge drama, with my mother crying to anyone who would listen about how her cruel daughter wouldn't let her see her only grandchild, how a simple mistake had ruined her relationship with me, how I was being paranoid and overprotective. Emily tried to mediate, suggesting that maybe I was overreacting, that Mom had learned her lesson, but I wasn't going to budge. Not when it came to my son's life. Things came to a head a few weeks later. When he went to pick up Mason from Emily's house. She had been watching him while I worked. And yes, I trust her with him because she actually reads labels and follows instructions. My mother was there, which wasn't a surprise, but what was a surprise was hearing her talking to Emily in the kitchen while Mason watched TV in the living room. They didn't know I had arrived early, and my mother was saying things like Mason was a burden. Just like that, in English, as if using another word made it less cruel. That I had spoiled him too much with my hippie lifestyle. That if I had raised him normally, he wouldn't have so many health problems. But what really destroyed me was hearing her say that maybe it was better that my marriage had failed because imagine bringing more defective children into the world. I stood there in the hallway, shaking, feeling like someone had punched me in the stomach. Emily didn't exactly defend her, but she didn't confront her either. Just mumbled something about how I was doing the best I could. I went into the living room, took Mason, and left without saying a word. That night, I sent my mother a text message telling her I didn't want any contact with her, not to come near me or Mason. That as far as we were concerned, she was dead. I know it sounds dramatic, but what am I supposed to do when someone calls my son a burden? When they blame his medical condition on my lifestyle? When they almost kill him through negligence and then act like the victim? My mother didn't give up easily. Let me tell you. First, it was text messages, dozens a day, alternating between tearful apologies and furious accusations. Then the calls, at all hours, which I didn't answer. Then she started showing up at my apartment building, ringing the buzzer until the neighbors complained. I had to threaten a restraining order to get her to stop. Then she changed tactics and started sending expensive gifts for Mason's birthday, costly toys, brand-name clothes, and most insulting of all, a box of gourmet cookies that, you guessed it, contained every single one of Mason's allergens. I don't know if it was on purpose or if she's really that disconnected from reality that she doesn't understand the danger, but either way, it confirmed that I did the right thing by cutting contact. I returned everything, every gift, with a note that simply said, "Do not contact us." This apparently was the straw that broke the camel's back because my mother started contacting every relative we had, telling them her version of the story where I was an ungrateful daughter, denying her access to her grandchild over a small misunderstanding. Suddenly, I was getting calls from aunts, cousins, even my mother's best friend Ruth, all telling me I was being cruel, that family is family, that my mother was devastated, that I should forgive and forget. Nobody, and I mean nobody, seemed to care that she almost killed my son. It was all about my mother's feelings, about her pain, about her suffering. Emily was the worst, honestly, because she knew the truth. She had been there. She had heard the comments. But she still pressured me to let go of the grudge. She would say things like, "Mom didn't mean that about the burden. You know how she is when she's upset." Or, "Maybe if you had been clearer about the allergies, as if I hadn't left a literal list with every allergen highlighted in yellow. Emily's betrayal hurt almost as much as everything else because I expected more from her. I expected that for once in her life she would take my side instead of taking the easy path of not confronting our mother. During the following months, I held my position. I changed my phone number, blocked everyone on social media, and focused on raising Mason and keeping my job. I hired a professional babysitter, Jennifer, who had experience with children with severe allergies, and little by little we built a routine that worked for us. Mason started kindergarten at a school that took his allergies seriously. I made friends with other parents who understood the challenges of raising a child with special medical needs, and honestly, we were happy, or as happy as we could be with all the family drama hanging over our heads. Then came the wedding of someone's second cousin. You don't even remember exactly who was getting married, just that it was a big family event. And I decided not to go because I knew my mother would be there. Emily begged me to reconsider, saying it would be weird if I didn't go, that people would talk, but I stood firm. The day of the wedding, I was at home with Mason, watching movies and eating popcorn homemade with coconut oil, because obviously, when Emily started sending me frantic messages, apparently, my mother had had a complete breakdown at the reception, crying hysterically, screaming my name, saying I had stolen her only reason to live, that she would rather be dead than live without her grandson. They took her to the hospital that night, and that's when they discovered she had severe bipolar disorder, something she had probably had for years but had never been diagnosed. Suddenly, everyone expected this to change everything, as if a diagnosis erased years of abuse and neglect. Emily called me from the hospital using someone else's number because I had blocked her too, telling me that Mom needed support, that this explained all her behavior, that now that we knew what was wrong, we could help her. But a diagnosis isn't an excuse, you know? It doesn't erase the damage done. It doesn't magically make me trust her with my son. It doesn't heal the wounds of an entire childhood of being less than my sister. My mother was admitted to a mental health institution in another state, something about a specialized program for her condition, and honestly, that gave me some peace. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because it meant she was far away, that she couldn't show up at my door or at Mason's preschool, that there was real physical distance between us. Emily moved to be near her, which didn't surprise me, and I lost contact with basically my entire extended family because everyone saw me as the monster who abandoned a sick woman. It's been 6 months since then, and Mason is thriving. His new allergist found a treatment that's helping reduce the severity of some of his reactions. He's in play therapy to process all the stress he lived through, because yes, 5-year-olds understand more than we think, and we have a quiet, stable life. Jennifer, his babysitter, has become part of our little family, and we have a circle of friends who support us without judging. Sometimes Mason asks about Grandma and Aunt Emily, and I tell him the age-appropriate truth. That Grandma is sick and needs to be in a special place to get better. That Aunt Emily is taking care of her. That we're fine here together. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive my mother, or if I even want to. I don't know if Emily and I will ever have a relationship again, or if there will always be this break between us. What I do know is that I did the right thing by protecting my son, even if it meant losing everyone else. Because at the end of the day, he's my priority, my responsibility, my whole world. And if I had to choose again between my family's approval and Mason's safety, I would choose Mason every time. Without hesitation, without looking back, without regrets. Last week, Mason told me before bed, "Mommy, I like that it's just the two of us. It's calmer." And he's right. It is calmer. It's safer. And for now, that's enough.